Good evening. Is this on? Okay. Well, happy St. Patrick's Day. And yes. And, how many devoted St. Patrick's Day fans are there? A few? All right. The others have already been drinking, so I don't know. I guess that's the way that works. But also happy spring and welcome to the University of Charleston. It's a pleasure for us to host you. I'm Dr. Ed Welch, if there's somebody in the room that doesn't know that, and I sometimes think I'm the president of the University of Charleston. And there's sometimes people turn to me and say, okay, nobody else wants to decide, it's your turn. University of Charleston Speaker Series has been going on now for some 13 years, and for all of that time, Dow Chemical Foundation has been the supporter of that series. We're indeed grateful to them for that. And we welcome the Dow people who are here, particularly Tyler London, who is the head of West Virginia operations. So thank you for supporting the program. At this time, I do the contemporary thing of saying if you have something on you that might make noise, please try to turn that off, whether that's a watch or an iPhone or whatever that might be, in the interest of other people who want to listen and helping the speaker out as well. I have one announcement, and that is the University of Charleston will have another public presentation when Dr. Jessica Hamar Martinez will be here. She is a research associate for the Pew Research Center, and she will talk about changing religious beliefs and practices in the United States and what that means for public opinion and what that means for public policy. And that presentation will be on Thursday night, April the 9th, same time, 6:30 here in the auditorium, and will be sponsored by the Sims Foundation. So you're welcome to return. So I'm to begin with a couple of questions for you. Do you believe that spending time in Charleston, West Virginia is a wonderful preparation for a successful life? Do you believe that it's possible for a native New Yorker who came to West Virginia to eventually survive and thrive in Texas? Maybe. We'll find out. Our guest tonight says that the time he spent here in the early 1980s proved to be the most formative and inspirational time of his life. And we hope that we will find out why he says that. He worked as the Gazette's State House reporter, covering the happenings under that big, beautiful dome just across the river. That's not quite as active today as it was 3 days ago. He then went on for 10 years as a reporter at the Philadelphia Inquirer, where he says folks were not as nice and friendly as West Virginians. We obviously spoiled him. He moved to Texas, where he's been a national award-winning columnist for 22 years. First at the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, and now as the watchdog at the respected Dallas Morning News. Known as the watchdog, our guest exposes corruption in his newspaper column, and after he's done hanging out the dirty laundry of everybody else, he spends his weekend doing his own. He's a storytelling master, a dreamer, who as a boy wanted to grow up to be Superman, but instead has settled for Clark Kent. Please join me in welcoming back to West Virginia, Dave Lieber. Welcome.
Hi. This is a homecoming for me. And the reason I say that is because let's go back to June 1981, it's the middle of the week, and I'm driving down I-79. It's a 3-hour stretch of road. I've never been to West Virginia before. I know at the end of the road is going to be this newspaper in Charleston that I'm going to have a job at. And I grew up in Broadway and 78th Street, and this is the longest stretch of life that I've ever gone without seeing a structure. Because back in the early 80s on I-79, it was still pretty much left alone except for the concrete ribbon passing through. And at this point now, I'm a little bit nervous because I haven't seen anybody in 2 hours. And I'm wondering what's on the other end of that trek. But I don't really have a choice because I am here to save my career and save my life because I was fired from my first job. It was in Florida right before this, and I don't even say the name of the city where it was, but I didn't work out very well there because I really didn't know how to talk to people. I didn't know how to deal with folks because I had grown up in Manhattan. And that wasn't a requirement. I knew how to push somebody with my shoulder, and I knew how to honk my horn, and I knew how to cut in line, and I knew how to be gruff and rough. And I wasn't sure if those qualities would serve me very well in Charleston, West Virginia. So I end up in the Sears parking lot on Canal Boulevard. This is before Sears moved over near Town Center, I guess. And I remember stepping out of the car. It was a beautiful day, and I did a 360, and I looked around, and I said, wow, this is a beautiful place. With the river and the bridges and buildings on both sides and these gorgeous buildings here. I mean, wow, this is really nice. And then I began to step out into West Virginia and begin to talk to people. And I made a couple of notes of I remember the first thing that I did here was I went for a ride on the sternwheeler P.A. Denny in the sternwheel regatta. And I rode with this guy, Russ Tuckwaller, and the captain, and I wrote a feature in the paper. And I thought, oh, this is the most fun I've ever had. It was a race, and there I was going down the Kanawha River. The second thing that happened was I learned how to say the word Kanawha, which, that was good. And then the third thing that happened that made me realize that I was going to have the most fun that I've ever had in my life here was when I met this man named A. James Manchin. And A. James Manchin had just hired, for those of you that are under 30, he was the Secretary of State, and he had just hired a man named Curtis Trent to be his top aide, and Curtis Trent had been an official in the Wally Barron administration 10 or 20 years before. And this was explained to me that this was an important story and that I was given a chance here to prove myself to my new editor, Don Marsh, and my publisher, the legendary Ned Chilton. And so I show up in Manchin's office, and within about 5 minutes, my rough, gruff, New York, pushing shoulders and beeping style didn't mesh with that guy, and he thundered, I am the great A. James Manchin, and I declare from the mountaintops for all of West Virginians to hear that you are nothing more than Ned's animal. And so about a week later, they were taking orders for coffee cups at the Gazette, and I got one inscribed that says Ned's animal. And I still have it 35 years later. I'm kind of proud of that cup. The topic of the talk tonight is called West Virginia, and I survived West Virginia and New York, but Texas almost killed me. And really the title should be Thank You, because the reason I'm really here tonight is because when I left town in 1983, I never really got to say thank you to the community for all the gifts that you gave me. And I was definitely a changed human being. I should have written an op-ed column for the paper, and I should have said, hey, by the way, thanks for hosting me there. Because it definitely changed my life. Because I'd never lived in a place where everybody knew your mom, and you were held accountable for what you did. And I never lived in a place where people were so overwhelmingly friendly that you could just talk to anybody about anything, and the conversation was going to go well. People weren't here suspicious. I learned how to say hello. I learned how to talk, and it changed me. I met the best group of people I've ever met in my life. They accepted me right away, my first week. Some of them are here tonight. And I never experienced that before or since. And so I've spent the last 32 years, I left when Charleston Town Center opened. That was when I moved away. I remember going to the opening ceremonies, and then I was gone. So for the next 32 years, when anybody has ever said to me that they're from West Virginia, I got excited. And I asked them, where? Oh, you're from Logan. Oh my God, the politics in Logan are crazy corrupt. Oh my God, you're from Morgantown. You are a party animal. Oh my God, you're from Huntington. Do you still go over to Kentucky to buy all your booze? Canaan Valley. Oh my God, that's so beautiful. Martinsburg. Oh, wherever it was, I always was just so happy to talk to them. It was great. But I couldn't stay because I had big ambitions. I wanted to be a columnist. My whole life, I just wanted to be a columnist. And this town already had a great columnist. His name's Rick Steelhammer. And we called him Rocco. And when I was there, Rocco got his first column, and he was off and running. And so I had to go off, and I had to work at the Philadelphia Inquirer for 10 years as a reporter. And I learned, how to be a great writer there because there were all these Pulitzer Prize winners running around that place, like Mark Bowden, who wrote Black Hawk Down, and H.D. Bissinger, who wrote Friday Night Lights. These were the guys that I worked with, and they were teaching me the great tricks of the trade of journalism. I wanted to be a columnist so bad. And Philadelphia was a rough town because people were not very nice. They were not West Virginia friendly. And they asked me when I came back, they said, "You talk funny. You talk funny." And I said, "What do you mean?" They said, "You talk Southern." And I said, "No, I don't." They said, "No, you do." And what had happened was I loved it here so much that I changed my dialect. And I renounced my New York dialect, which turned out to be a good thing because, in The Right Stuff, Tom Wolfe talks about how the West Virginia accent of Chuck Yeager is the most calming dialect in the American language, and that all the pilots want to talk like Chuck. It's 53 degrees and we're cruising down to Amarillo Airport, and everybody sit back. This has been a great ride. Meanwhile, that guy's from Brooklyn, but he wants to talk like Chuck. So I think I adopted the Texas. And I know to you it doesn't sound like I talk like a West Virginian, but one time I talked to a linguistic professor, and I said, "Where do you place my accent?" And she said, "Talk." And I talked, and she said, "I place your accent in Wheeling, West Virginia." And I was like, "Yes, that's close enough, So that's Charleston with the New York influence coming down, So 20 plus years ago, I ended up getting hired at the Fort Worth Star-Telegram as a columnist, and I'm really excited because I'm going to get to live my dream now, and I'm going to go down to this new state, Texas, and it's going to be like West Virginia. Even though Texas is bigger than West Virginia, they're friendly. Like everyone says they're friendly. They have this signs that say "Drive Texas Friendly," and so it's going to be like West Virginia, and everybody's going to be real nice to me, and I'm just going to work and have a great time just like I had in wild and wonderful Almost Heaven. I made a terrible mistake. I just assumed that Texas was like West Virginia. Because when I got to Texas in the summer of '93, and don't ever move here in the summer of any year, right? The Texans were very friendly on the surface, but the way they did it was they asked a series of questions. And the first question they asked it so much. I never really got asked it here by you too much, but there they were obsessed with it, and it should be on the license plate because it's a state motto. They would look at me and they go, "Boy, where are you from?" And it's a trick question. I would tell them where I was from, and they would quote back a picante sauce commercial on TV. Do you remember that commercial? How does it go? And then what's the next line? Get a rope. So I have all these Texans saying to me this commercial, "New York City, get a rope." And I don't even know what they're talking about because I can't even picture that. And then I don't even know what picante sauce is. And they think it's funny. So that's fine. Okay, if that's your joke, I understand. But where are we going from here? Well, where we went from here was kind of a dangerous place. They'd ask me a second question, and they're obsessed with this question. And I got asked this question every day and still do. And this question is one that I never got asked in any of the previous 10 states that I had ever lived in. You got to picture this. I'm at the supermarket, which it's the first week in Texas. I'm buying my first set of groceries. But they don't call it the supermarket. They call it the grocery. And I'm pushing the shopping cart in the fruit and vegetable aisle, but they call it a buggy. And when I hit this elderly man's cart accidentally in the fruit and vegetable aisle, I turn to him and go, "Hey man, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to bump into you." "Boy, where are you from?" And then I would tell him, and he would do the New York City get a rope dance. And then he would turn to me and he asked me this second question. He'd say, "What church do you go to?" You never asked me that once. And I would say, "I don't go to any church." And he'd say, "Well, why not, Yankee boy? Don't you believe in the Lord?" "No, I do believe in the Lord." "Well, then why don't you go to church?" And I'd give the absolute wrong answer you could give in Fort Worth, Texas in 1993. I'd say, "Because I'm Jewish." And, Pastor trains these converts, right? But I don't think Pastor prepared him for that answer, because he would fall back into the kumquats, and he would go, okay, well, I knew a Jewish boy in the army 20 years ago. Do you know Lieutenant Harry Cohen? And I said, no, sir, it's a big tribe. And then I realized at this point that it was in the DNA of a Texan to connect. They couldn't help but connect with everybody they meet, just like you, but they were not so subtle about it, because they'd ask another question because they're looking for a connection, and they'd invariably say, well, what does your wife do? And I would say, well, man, I'm divorced. And at that point, the shoulders would drop, the eyes would start spinning around their head, and they'd be like, what am I going to talk to this Yankee boy about? And then they'd come up with something like, well, do you have any kids? And I would say no. And at that point, they would give up. And they'd literally walk away. Good luck, Yankee boy. And I could not make a friend like I made here. The first week, I couldn't make any friends there at all. And the reason I couldn't make any friends there is because I answered all the questions wrong. And I had to write 3 columns a week for the newspaper in a state that I had never been to, in a place that I didn't understand what makes people laugh or cry. And I had to connect. And I didn't know what to do. So the first week there, in the summer of '93, I wrote a story saying, hey, everybody, I'm new here, and I've never really understood a lot about, but I'm learning really quickly. And one of the things I'm learning about is a new 3-word expression that I've never heard of called chicken fried steak. Do you know what that is? Have you heard that? Some people here haven't probably heard that, right? But that's like the Texas food dish, chicken fried steak. And I started to make fun of it a little, and I said to everybody in the article, is it chicken or is it steak? And the Texans were horrified. And they said, this is just terrible that we have a columnist at this newspaper that doesn't even know what our state food dish is. And this is not very funny. And I'm going to call him. And that's what happened when Billy Bob Joe Earl Smith of Haltom City, Texas, called me on the phone for my first fan phone call. And he said, Mr. Lieber, I've been reading the newspaper for 46 years, and that right there is the worst piece of writing I've ever seen. Boy, where are you from? What church do you go to? And I couldn't answer his questions the right way. And so something happened then in that first month that never would have ever happened here. The people in Texas decided that they didn't want me to be their columnist, and they started writing to the newspaper and right away complaining about me. And it was okay, I didn't mind, because I kind of knew that that went with the ball game. But the problem was, of course, that, well, for them the problem was this. There was no internet yet. There was no email. It was 1993. All they had was a stupid fax machine. So Billy Bob Joe Earl Smith of Haltom City, Texas, would roll faxes out saying, get rid of that New Yorker guy. We don't like him. And the faxes would just curl up and end up on the floor. Now they'd go viral and it'd be a worldwide, trending topic on Twitter. But back then it was nothing, so I got to keep my job, for a little bit of time. But I understood where he was coming from. Because as I looked around at my new audience, they were different from me. They were mostly all Republican. They were mostly all conservative. They were all married. They were all native Texans. And they were all Baptists. And not one of them said, what we need here, cut right in for us, is a liberal, divorced, democratic New York City Jew. I got to stop right there and just talk to you for a moment about what we're doing here. I just want to talk to you about the power of the story and tell you a little bit about what I'm doing and how I'm doing it so that you can see it for the rest of the night. Because the only way I got to survive without giving away the end of the story is just by saying that I really live in the power of the story, and I believe that we all tell stories, and the question is, how well do we tell them? And the only way I think you ever get anything that you want in life is to tell good stories. So if you're a lawyer like my friend Ted Cantor, or a landlord like Gary Borstein, my friend, and you want to get your clients or your tenants to do something correctly, rather than tell them to do it in bullet points, if you put it in a story, then they care. So I learned this as a young reporter, and I've been living my life in a story. And there's even a formula that I follow that I'm going to follow tonight, and I want to share it with you. It's the storytelling formula. I've never seen it so simple. It's a straight line going across, and then it's a downward V, and then you come back up, and there's a loop. And this is the 100,000-year-old formula for stories, because what it is this is where you meet the character in the first few seconds or the first minutes of a movie or a play or a book or a story. And this is where you met me, and I decided to spend my first bit of real estate in my story talking to you about what it was like to move here in June of 1981 and be on I-79. And then, of course, every story has a hero and a villain, and every story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And a hero can be anything, and a villain can be a person, place, or thing. And in my story, Downward Trek, it's my ignorance about moving to a new place, which is my villain. I have to overcome it. But the hero goes out into the world and meets the villain, and the villain drives the hero down to the low point. The low point is the best part of the story for me, because that's where the meat is, that's where the pain is, and that's where you learn from. I don't learn from success, I learn from failure. I know I've had a lot. And then when you're down at the bottom of the V, you do something heroic to get out, to overcome. You have a heroic quality that you pull out of your pocket, something that you've never done before, and that allows you to fight the villain, reach the climax of the story, and then the curlicue at the end is what we learned in English, the denouement, which is the tying up of the loose ends. If I tell my story and then people come up to me and they go, Dave, that was great, but tell us, did the dog die? That means I didn't give them this. Because the brain loves this formula. And we have these billions of neural endings, and when we tell a story, the brain gets excited and we kind of lean forward and we get excited. But when we do what I'm doing now, which is talking about rather than showing it, it's a little more boring, and now's when you can yawn, you know? But I can lift you right back, I can lift your brain right back up with a story, just in a flash, like watch. We save on scenery that way. So I get to Texas, and I'm not finding that West Virginia friendliness, because it turns out that Texas is a two-headed hydra. On the one hand, they have signs that say, drive Texas friendly. On the other hand, they have signs everywhere that say, don't mess with Texas. And I'm like, make up your mind, you know, which one is it? Are you friendly or are you threatening? And it turns out they're a little bit of both. Because what happened next was kind of scary. The editor of the paper, he's a guy named Mike Blackman. He's hired me, and he's taken a risk by hiring a New Yorker in Texas. And he says to me, you know, I'm getting a lot of faxes about you. Come to have dinner with me, and we'll talk about how you can survive here. Because he says, you can't act here like you did up north here, because we're different. And I go, okay, fine, you know. So we sit down at a restaurant, and he starts to lecture me, and he says, you can't ever, for example, use your car horn here ever. And I said, what do you mean I can't use my car horn here? He says, well, you're not using your car horn, are you? And I said, yeah, I am. I'm from Manhattan. Everything is... He said, don't do it here because it's rude. People don't allow it. No one's ever said that to me before. I was even allowed to use my horn here. And I said, well, what happens if I'm about to be in a head-on collision? He says, yeah, go ahead, but it'll be too late. And then he said something that just changed the way I think and the way I drive. He said, don't ever do what you did up north. Don't ever give anybody an obscene gesture here when you drive. And I said, why not? And he says, because they will shoot your finger off. And I know he wasn't kidding, because that summer in '93 when I moved there was on the news, there was this freeway overpass sharpshooter. He would stand on the overpass bridges, and when the cars would come by, he would shoot out their back windshields for fun. And that was right near where I lived. And I heard that, and I said, okay, I'm never going to do it again. And I am proud to say that I am coming up on 20 years of finger-free driving. I'm going to get my 20-year chip from Fingerholics Anonymous, you know. But the time that I act most like a Texan is when I get on this big highway near my house. It's called 635. People there are crazy, and they act like New Yorkers. And every once in a while, someone will do it to me. And that is when I act most like a Texan. I will roll down my window, and I will say, you go back to New York! And it feels good. So I'm learning these little bits of knowledge about what it's like to fit into this community. But there are certain things that you did not prepare me for. Like, even though you taught me a lot while I lived here, you didn't prepare me for Tex-Mex. And when I got to Texas, everybody was saying, have you had our Tex-Mex? We make the best Tex-Mex. We invented Tex-Mex. How come our... And I was like, what is Tex-Mex? And they said, duh. So I had to write 3 columns a week. So I went to a restaurant, and I sat down, and I'm taking notes because I'm going to write my first story about my first Tex-Mex meal. And the waitress comes by, and she puts the menu down. And I open it up, and I call her back, because I say, you made a mistake. You gave me the Spanish menu. but she's already gone in the kitchen. So now I'm looking at the Spanish menu, and I don't know what anything in it is. I can't even, like chili con queso, enchiladas. There's one thing that I order, if I order, I know it'll attack me, chimichanga. But there was one thing on the back that I recognized. I might have even had a few while I was here. It was called a Texas-sized margarita. And the waitress comes over and she says to me, "May I help you?" And I said, "What? May I help you?" And I said, "Yeah, I don't know what to order because you gave me the Spanish menu." And she said, "Well, that is our regular menu, sir." And I said, "Well, I don't know what to get. I've never been here before. What do you recommend?" She said, "This. We get the best of these." I said, "Okay, give me some fajitas." And I remember her mouth goes up, but she doesn't say anything. And she comes back with all these plates and puts them down. And I knew what some of them were. There was beef, and there was cheese, and there was onions, and there was peppers. But over in the corner was a stack of these white pancakes. And then there was a white cream of some kind, and over here was a giant green glob of snot. I didn't know what it was. And yeah, but because I'm taking notes, I'm writing down, and I eat the meat with a fork, and then I eat a bite out of the pancake, and then I take the spoon and I start eating the green glob. Now, the glob is good, but I don't know if it's a fruit or a vegetable because it's not marked or anything. Now, the waitress is horrified, and she comes running over, and she says, "Sir, that's not how you eat a fajita." Oh, I said, "Okay, fajita." And then she did what nobody in Texas would ever do for me. She started to help me and show me. And she says, "Take the tortilla, and put the sour cream on, and then put the meat on, and then she says, put the peppers and the onions and sprinkle the cheese, and then she says, put the guacamole on, and then she says, roll it up." So I'm excited because no one has ever explained to me how to do anything, and now I have instructions, it's all written, and I start to make this fajita. And when I start to roll it up, without knowing exactly how to do it, I rolled it too tight. I rolled it very aggressively. I rolled it the way they roll in Colorado. And I had the world's longest, thinnest, tightest fajita, and when I took a bite out of it, everything shot out. But I didn't care because I was on my second Texas-sized margarita, you know. And I wrote a story about the first Tex-Mex meal and people were just really horrified that this Yankee had come in and he's making fun of the food and he doesn't understand fajitas, and it was just like a big mess. But I didn't know what to do because I didn't know what I didn't know, and I didn't know anything. And every time I left, I saw stuff that confused me because they're the Lone Star Nation. They're the whole different planet. And I figured, man, this is too big for me. I remember when I went to West Virginia to learn about the culture and the history, I read books in the library about the history of West Virginia, and I went to the Cultural Center, and I saw museum exhibits. I learned about 1863. So really, I'll just duplicate that. I'll go to the library, and I'll learn about Texas. Because there's no internet, so I got to read. So I run to the library, and I meet the librarian, and I say to her, real naively, I say, "Hi, do you have any books here on Texas?" And she bursts out laughing. She says, "We got the whole wing over there." Because they literally have thousands and thousands of books. And the first book I pulled was called The Story of the Alamo, because I didn't know it. They don't teach the story of the Alamo in the New York City public school system. I couldn't remember the Alamo, you know. And it's a great story. You probably all know it. Everybody pretty much dies at the end. And I was baffled. If everybody dies at the end, then why is this? So I go to the Alamo, and when you get over the initial shock of this beautiful structure standing in the middle of giant downtown San Antonio, there's this gorgeous building, and it's really inspiring. And I learned about the moment that Texas was born. That was fun. The second book I pulled was called The History of the Fort Worth Fat Stock Show. Because everybody is telling me, when the stock show comes, you're going to love the Fat Stock Show. And I'd say, "Well, what is it?" And they go, "You'll see." So the book explained, you know, and by page 7, I figured out it had nothing to do with the Dow Jones Industrial Average. The next book I pulled was called Line Dancing, which is something else that you never taught me here. Does anybody here know how to line dance? Just a few over here? Because it's not going like this, you know, that's not what it is. The next book, though, really just changed me because it was called How to Talk Like a Texan. And when I read it, I began to understand what everybody was saying about me, because people would talk about me and I wouldn't understand. They'd say, "Oh, there's that Yankee columnist. He keeps funning us. I don't cotton to him. And I didn't know what that meant because I thought, well, it's fun, right? Well, the book said they hate you. The book said that, explained why everybody in Fort Worth always said they were fixin', but no one ever did any fixin'. See, what I mean by that is they say, in Fort Worth, every sentence is, I'm fixing to go get some milk. I'm fixing to go to work, but nobody ever fixes anything. The book explained that y'all, which is a really, really big word in Texas, is actually singular when used with the plural of y'all, which is what? All y'all. Do you say that here? I don't remember that word from here. And I fell in love with that word because that word is I believe, the word of world peace. It rhymes, it goes backwards and forwards. Don't you love all y'all, all y'all? And then the next part of the book really was interesting. It had expressions, and when I would meet like a lady, a very distinguished lady, and she'd say, well, where are you from, and what church do you go to? And when I would tell her, she would always answer the same way. She'd say, well, bless your heart. And I thought they were blessing my heart, but the book said, no, that's the equivalent of the obscene gesture outside the car window. So ladies, please don't bless my heart tonight, okay? So I'm reading books. I'm eating fajitas and tortillas. And I realized that I can't get away dressed like this. Because when I lived in West Virginia, I could wear what I would consider to be normal clothes, like this. But in Texas, this did not fly because everything in Texas, on a party invitation, it says RSVP, Western attire, please. And I did not have attire. And I didn't even know what it was called. But I knew after living there a few months that I had to go out and get the cowboy costume. Do not walk into the Western wear store and ask the lady for a cowboy costume. Because she got upset and she said, this isn't a Halloween store, Sonny. What do you want? And I said, I want to get the cowboy get-up. And she said, you want to get Western attire? And I said, oh, yes, ma'am, that's what I want. She said, well, what do you want? And I named the word, but I didn't know the Texas word. I knew the Manhattan word. This was the word that said on the store windows growing up. I said, I want to get a pair of the cowboy dungarees. She said, what? And I said, the cowboy dungarees. And she said, are you talking about coveralls? And I had never heard the word coveralls before, but I come to find, that's a good phrase from my Texas dictionary, I come to find that coveralls are what 82-year-old men wear to Sears on Saturday, And she says, what you want is blue jeans. And I had never used the word before. And I said, yes. And she said, you want cowboy cut? And I don't know what that is, ma'am. But she brought out the pair and she put them down. And I looked at the pants. And so help me, the pants, they stared back at me. And I said, these are too stiff. I said, I can't wear these. And she said, well, that's how we wear them. And I said, no, ma'am, I'm going to stone wash them. And she said, what's that? And I said, well, that's what we did to our dungarees in Manhattan. We put them in the washer and the dryer 20 times, and we softened them up. And she says, well, here you ain't doing that, because here you are taking them to the dry cleaners. And I said, what? And she said, you heard me. You got to get your pants pressed and creased and starched so they look right. And I said, why? And she said, because you want to look pretty. And I said, well, where I'm from, when you want to look pretty, you don't wear dungarees. And she said, well, you ain't there no more. So you just hush up and go try them on. And so Mr. Blue Jeans and I, we walked together into the cubby. And in that little cubby, I remember putting those blue jeans on, and they were so tight that I could barely walk and barely breathe. And I walk out like Lurch. And I say, these are too tight. And she says, turn around, let me see. Yeah, they fit real good. Come on, let's go get you a belt. No, I got a Bloomingdale's belt. That's a sissy belt. Come on. And so she sells me a belt with a buckle as big as my butt, which I come to find in Texas is you earn the big belt buckle, but I think she was just funning me. And then we get into an argument about the shirts because they have snaps, and I've never seen a men's shirt that has snaps. And I thought it was a woman's shirt, but it wasn't. And then she sells me a pair of boots, my first pair of cowboy boots, and they came in a little boot purse that you hold like this. And then she sold me my first cowboy hat, which came in a big black cowboy hat cake box. And I take the cake box and I put it in the back seat of the car, and I drive home with two hands, And the stuff just sits on the chair for a month because it's intimidating. It's not me. But I got invited to my first party, and it says on the bottom of the invitation, RSVP, Western Attire, please. And that Saturday night, I've got to get all this out and put it on, and I don't know how to do it because I don't have a mentor. And I apologize to the ladies because this is a kind of an ugly image, but I did everything backwards. I start with the hat, I snap the shirt, I pull up the blue jeans, and the belt isn't like a normal buckle. It has prongs. And it's no instruction manual. I don't know where the prongs go, but eventually I see some holes and I prong it back in there, and I stand up and I look in the mirror and I don't recognize that man. Wow, there he is, the Jewish Jesse James. And I don't like the way he's looking at me. And I tell him, I say, you better smile when you say that, partner. And he doesn't smile, so I shot him. Boom, boom, boom. And I remember when I put my imaginary pistol back in my imaginary holster, I forgot the car keys were right there. And they fell off the counter. And I forgot I was wearing this big belt buckle, and I bent over, and that thing just about cut me. And then I really couldn't even get back up because the pants were so stiff. But I push up, and I'm just a wreck, and I'm walking out to the car like Lurch. And I get in the car, and I learn another lesson in Texas. I learned why cowboys don't drive little Hondas, because the hat gets crushed on the roof, you know. I drove to the party, and I thought everybody's going to laugh at me and point at me. And I walked in, and I looked like everybody else. And I'd never had that feeling there. And I thought, this is really great. I'm going to write an article about what it's like to wear, and I probably shouldn't have called it cowboy costume. You know? I was trying so hard to find what I had here that I kept getting worse. And I'm digging a hole. I'm going down to the bottom of my V. You know, that low point. The low point came when I think I lost my mind. Imagine what it's like if you wanted to be something your whole life and you finally get to do it and you stink at it. And there I am, 3 times a week in the newspaper stinking at it because I didn't understand anything. So I'm thinking to myself, how can I rescue myself from this dilemma? What can I do? What do Texans admire? What do they respect? Well, they talk about rodeos. I've never seen a rodeo. They talk about bull riding. They say that bull riding is really cool and dangerous and fun and neat, and they say that they save it to the end because it's so dramatic. So how about if I just go ride a bull in a rodeo? If I do that, the Texans will respect me. Didn't your opinion of me just drop? Isn't that like the insanity factor? I mean, how could I, 37 years old at this point, ride a bull in a rodeo? Well, simple. I went to the library and took out a book. And it was called How to Ride a Bull in a Rodeo. And it had pictures. And I sat down every night after work on my ottoman, and I opened up the book, and I read it, and I memorized it, and I practiced. And the ottoman never threw me. And it only took 3 days to find a rodeo that would let me enter. It was the First Baptist Church of North Richland Hills, Texas. They were having a church rodeo, and I called them up on the phone, and they told me that anyone can sign up for any event if they pay $25, and taught me a new Texas word called waiver. I went to the church, I paid the money, and I signed the waiver, and I went back to the ottoman, and I practiced. And I went to the paper, and I told the boss that I was going to ride a bull in a rodeo, and that if I did, every Texan would think that I was much cooler than they did now. And she said, "Are you crazy?" And I said, "No, this is all planned. I paid $25 and I signed the waiver." She said, "No, you're crazy. You're going to die." And I said, "No, I'm not. It's a church rodeo." And she said, "The bull don't know that." And she told me that I couldn't do it, and I told her it was my Saturday night, it was my own free time, and she said, "Oh yeah, then it is going to be your free time." And she typed up a letter that said, "I'm going against her wishes, and I understand this, and if I get hurt, that I cannot claim company health insurance." That's how I know I was crazy at that moment in my life, because I signed it without even thinking about the ramifications of falling off a bull and getting hurt and going to the hospital and having to pay tens of thousands of dollars myself. All I cared about was attaining some level of respect from people that just couldn't stand me. And she said, "Don't die, and call me when it's over." So I went home, and you know what I did. I sat down on my ottoman, and I practiced. And the next Saturday night came, and I got dressed in my cowboy costume, and I drove out to this town called Azle, Texas, that has this arena, and there were 200 Baptists who were having the night of their life. It started off with the minister from the church. His name was Pastor Jimmy, and he was riding around the arena waving, and he was sitting atop an old bull, and it was cool. Hey, everybody, hey, look, there's Pastor Jimmy. Hey, hey. And I'm thinking, that could be my bull. But it wasn't. I don't remember going to a rodeo here. I'm sure there are rodeos here because there's rodeos everywhere. There's Tex-Mex everywhere. But that first rodeo was something I'll never forget because they have these events that didn't make sense. You know, they had this calf scramble where the kids try and tie the legs of the calves. And I didn't know if you root for the calves or the kids. They had barrel racing and women. I've never seen women ride horses that fast. They had their ponytails coming out of their helmets, and they were going, whoosh, whoosh, and it was cool. And then at the end of that event, it was the time, and they said, all the bull riders, please report to the stalls. Bull riders, your event is up now. And I remember getting up, putting my pen and my book and my camera down because I was cramming, and walking over in my stiff blue jeans. And there are 5 of the most handsome cowboy men you've ever seen just standing there like this with straw coming out of their mouth looking at me. And I say to them, who are you guys? We're here to put you on the bull. Well, why does it take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of you? You'll see. Get on number 1. And that was the orientation. So I remember walking over to number 1, and I climb over this stall, and I'm so stupid at this point, I don't even know what I'm doing. I climb over, and I start to do what's in the book. Not thinking about the danger, just excited because I'm going to get to prove my Texas manhood. And I know exactly. I got the hat on low, and I got the chin tucked, and I got this arm up, and this arm's grabbing here, and I got the toes are out, and the heels are in, the back is straight, and the legs are clenching, just like the guy in the book. And I could hear my adrenaline. It was whooshing. And I could see the 10 arms that those guys were tying around and whatever they were doing. And then they said, you ready, Dave? And I said, I'm ready. How long's a good bull ride? Does anybody know? 8 seconds. So they open up the door. What do you call the door? The chute. And I am on this bull now for the next 10 seconds. The bull didn't read my book. For the first 8 seconds, this bull froze in the stall and didn't move. And my book didn't tell me what to do. And I mean, I'm dying up there because I hear the Baptists going, come on, ride him, man, come on, he's Jewish, ride him. And I remember that my adrenaline is not going to last the full time. So I'm starting to droop now, and there's video of this on the internet, like 2 seconds, 4 seconds, 6 seconds, 8 seconds. The bull has, even though his head looking forward, his eyes have rounded back in his head, and he's staring back at me, which is freaky. That's where they got the expression bullseye from. And on the 8-second mark, this big guy comes up behind the bull, and he just goes, and the bull shoots off. And that's how I got the other 1.6 seconds. Because it was 8 seconds in, and 1.6 out is 9.6 rounded up to 10 seconds Yankee time. The truth is that I am in the air longer than I am on the bull. But I do not care because it's a joyous ride, because when I land, I know that all y'all are going to like me. And I land, and I was so excited. I had done it, I had lived, and it was wonderful. And I just forgot about the next chapter in the book, which started with the word run. And I finally remembered, I got to get out of here. And I run out. And that's when the announcer said the first nice thing a Texan ever said about me. He goes, that was Dave Lieber from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. Let's give Dave a big hand, because you won't find anybody from the Dallas Morning News trying that. And that is as close as I get to the Pulitzer, you know. And so I wrote about it thinking that they'd read it and they'd go, okay, he's a cool cat. He wants to be like us. Give him a break. What happened was they read it and they go, this New York boy made way too big a deal of 1.6 seconds on a bull. This is pathetic. This is sad. And I was running out of stuff. I mean, this is going on now 6 months, and I don't know what to do. It's spring now. Spring of 94. And like spring everywhere, it's romantic. I see Texas love everywhere. I see couples who've been married for 50 years holding hands. Anybody here been married 50 years? Yeah, and I'm thinking, I'm never going to be like you guys. I'm never going to find the love of my life. I saw young families pushing strollers along the river. I'm never going to get a date. If I could just get a date, that would solve all my problems. She would introduce me to people. She'd give me story ideas. She would take me around. And then my ultimate fantasy is she would edit my stories before they go into the newspaper. That was my dream girl. But nobody would fix me up with anybody. Because the conversation would go like this. Hey, I got a guy you can go out with. Would you like to go out with a Jewish bull rider from Manhattan? You know, I told you that when you get down to the low point of the story, you have to do something heroic that you never did before to overcome the villain. And this is where I finally got smart. I said, I have to do something different because what I'm doing ain't working. And I noticed that there was one attribute of a Texan which was sometimes a little overbearing and annoying because it's so much in your face. But I hadn't done it. And they do it all the time. They do it in public. They do it in private. I was really surprised when I moved there that they actually do it at city council meetings and chamber meetings without thinking twice. They do it so much that the Supreme Court told them they had to stop doing it in certain places. You know what I'm talking about? Prayer. I thought, boy, these Texans are praying everywhere, and I'm not praying. I should just try this Texas thing and see what happens because I have nothing left. And so it was a Wednesday night in April of 1994. And it was 9:30. I remember it so well. I got down by the side of the bed and I said, Lord, I have been here now for 9 months, and these Texans are killing me. If I hear one more Texan say, oh, that Dave Lieber guy, he just fell off the turnip truck, I don't know what I'm going to do, Lord, because I don't even know what a turnip truck is. But can you please help me, and can you send me a good, strong, mature, wise Texas woman? And if you do, I will treat her with respect and dignity. And if you can't send me one right away, just send me a sign that a good woman is coming my way, and I will hang on. Amen. And that was what I said. And, you know, I got to tell you, you know what happens when you pray in Texas? My proof on the answer is that the Dallas Cowboys went 12-4 this year, you know, when they shouldn't. Because it literally took 1 week for the phone to ring. 1 week after the prayer, the phone rings. There's this lady on the line. She says her name is Patty Smith. And she says, Mr. Lieber, you don't know me. I'm the president of the local women's club. And I've been reading your column since you got here. And I just want to say first out that you're not nearly as bad as everybody says you are. In fact, I would like you to come cover my fashion show at the airport hotel for my women's club this week. And I said, no, ma'am, I can't cover fashion show. I don't know anything about fashion. No, no, no. And she said, well, it's not really about fashion. We're raising money for charity. We're volunteers. We're going to help people. Please come. And I said, ma'am, with all due respect, I covered the mafia in my last job in Philadelphia. And I said, things are bad here, but they're just not that bad. And I regret that because I don't think you should compare the women's club president to the Godfather, you know. And she said, okay, fine. If you don't want to come, I don't want to force you. And then in this typical Texas woman, smart style, she starts to play me. And she says, you know, before I get off the phone, I want to ask you a personal question. I said, yeah, sure. She says, you're not married, are you? And I say, no, I'm not. And how can you tell? And she says, because it's obvious you never write about anything interesting. Well, she's right. I mean, I never wrote about a wife or family or pets because I didn't have anything. I was solo, still figuring out tortillas. And she said, I'll tell you what. It's too bad you're not coming to my fashion show because all the girls in my club, we got together and we picked out a woman that we thought would have been perfect for you. And I said, I can't do that. And she said, why not? I said, because that's against the newspaper's code of ethics. You can't exchange something of value for a story. And she said, oh, I didn't know that newspaper people had a code of ethics. And so she says, I wouldn't want to get you fired, so forget that I brought it up because besides, there's a problem with this woman anyway. And I said, what kind of problem? And she said the words that changed my life. She said, quote, many men are intimidated by her beauty. And I remembered that I had just prayed for a sign. And I knew that that was a sign, and I knew that if I ignored it, I would never have another chance. So I heard my mouth open up and go, "What time's that fashion show?" And that's another thing you didn't prepare me for. A Texas Women's Club fashion show. Oh my goodness, what an ordeal this is. It's a full-day production. They get dressed. They get the hair done. They got a silent auction. They got a live auction. They got a raffle. They drink wine. They look at jewelry. They gossip for a bit. Then they eat this big lunch, and then they have this style show. And I'm the only guy there, and I'm taking notes about handbags and gowns and don't know what. And at the end, Patty comes up to me, and she grabs me by the arm, and she says, "Okay, you kept your promise. I'm keeping mine." And she takes me over, and she taps on this woman's shoulder, and this woman turns around and flashes this megawatt smile. It's blinding. And Patty says, "You know, Karen, this is the guy from the paper I told you about, Dave Lieber. Dave, this is Karen." And Karen says, "I am so pleased to meet you. Patty has said very nice things about you." And I took her hand, and I could feel the beads of sweat already dripping off. And I said, because I hadn't talked to a woman in a year. And she says, "I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'll write down my name and number on a piece of paper, and if you feel like ever talking, call me." Okay. And I took this piece of paper, this valuable piece of paper, and I started to do a line dance down to the parking garage. And then I knew what was coming next was the hardest part. I had to call her. And I don't think the ladies in the audience really ever appreciated what us guys have to go through to make the first phone call, because it's nerve-wracking. I mean, my heart is pounding in my chest. "Hello, is Karen there?" And she gets on the phone the next day, and we had this conversation for about an hour where it all just falls into place. She's my age, she's lived a couple of miles away from me, and she's been divorced as long as I've been. And we just hit it off. The next day we talked for 2 hours, and the next day for 4, and the next day for 6, and by the end of the first week we talked on the phone for 20 hours. We're good friends. But this is when a guy like me ruins it by going out. And so we went on our first date that next Saturday night. I think it was April 23rd, 1994. We walk into this big banquet hall in a hotel, and I'm trying so hard to be cool, trying hard to be Charleston cool. And it doesn't work because the publisher of the newspaper sees us and stands up and says, "Come on, Lieber, over here's our table." Oh my God, Lieber got a date. And the room turns around, and poor Karen says, What was that?" And I go, "Oh, he's just fooling me. Come on, let's go over there." And he's not done. He stands up, he buttons his blazer, and he looks her dead in the eye and says, "Wow, what are you doing with him?" And she says, "Well, I like him." So now I pull out her chair, and she sits down, and I don't see the water glass there, and when I sit down, I knock it over. And the editor's over here, and she just jumps up, and she says, "Good luck with this guy." So now I'm at the most embarrassing moment of my life, and so the way I handled it was I just didn't say a word. I just watched as Karen took over the table. She made friends with everybody around the table, and it turns out later I figured out why. She's a military brat. Any military brats here? You guys lived all over the world, and you can talk to anybody about anything. And at the end of the meal, the publisher says to his new best friend, Karen, he says, "Hey, Karen, would you please pass the pitcher of cream?" And I see her pick it up. And her pinky's up the way a Texas Women's Club member does it. And he puts the cream in her big man claws, and in just a split second in slow motion, I see this pitcher just spill and drop all over his lap. And I go, "Yes." How is she going to handle this? How cool is she? Let's see. And so she's cool. She takes her napkin, she shakes the crumbs out. She says, "I'm so sorry, let me clean it up." She looks down, sees where the puddle landed, turns to his wife and says, "Here, you better do it." And I just burst out laughing. And I said, "That is the greatest thing. I spilled, you spilled. It must be love. Give me high five." What did I just say? This is our first date. But she turns and she gives me the high five. Boom. And I realized later that's like the thunderbolt of love that just hit us right there at the table. Boom! And we go outside that hotel, and we're outside for like a minute and a half, and we have our first kiss right there in the parking lot. And it is the greatest moment of my life. Next day, I know what I got to do. I got to go to her house and meet her 2 kids. She has a 9-year-old boy, Jonathan, and an 11-year-old girl, Desiree. And I remember knocking on the door, and Jonathan is waiting for me. He looks like Dennis the Menace, and he's smiling, and he says, "Hi, Mr. Lieber." "Hey, John, you can call me David. Nice to meet you." "David, I have a question for you. Are you going to be my new daddy?" I said, "Let me in the house first." But he's smiling. He thinks it's funny. It's his idea of a joke. "That's okay. I understand. You're 9. That's cool. Hey, Karen, how are you?" And out of the bedroom comes Desiree, 11 years old, who we both notice, even though I'm in my new cowboy boots, she's taller than me. And I say, "You're Desiree, aren't you?" And she walks and she says, "I am, little man." And she grabs me by the chin and she says, "I just want to warn you, before you get too comfortable with my mama, you better not hurt her feelings." And I looked up and I said, "I won't." I thought these two kids were adorable because they laid their cards right out on the table, which is fine. But then they had this other family member who was just glaring at me with utter contempt. It wasn't Karen's mom, that came later. They had this dog. They had this runt retriever, yellow, named Sadie. And she's just going, "Arr, arr." And I'm like walking towards her so she can start to smell me and get comfortable with me. And that wasn't going to happen. As I get too close to her, she has a panic attack. I've never seen an animal have a panic attack, but it was, because she starts running around and biting her tail, and then she starts crying, and then she lets off this ammonia scent, which literally clears the room. And I said, "What is wrong with your stupid dog?" And it turns out that the dog has this traumatic disorder. Her previous owner was a man who wanted to take her hunting, and she didn't like to go hunting, and so he was abusive to her, and he threw things at her, and he yelled at her, and he told her he was going to take her to the pound. And Karen said, "I found her at the pound, and I rescued her. And she's been with me ever since, and there's been no man around, and you're giving her flashbacks." I don't have a big size of Sadie with me, but I don't know if you can see this, but this is a picture of Sadie, and she has a very upset look on her face because I'm the one that took this picture of her. And she would always look at me no matter what I did and just look and go, So I'd go, "Here, girl, I got you some meatballs. I'm taking you on a walk." And it was just so disconcerting. But then after a while, I figured out what the problem was. After a few weeks of dealing with this dog was a native Texan. And I looked in those eyes, and I saw the native Texans who couldn't stand me, who just looked at me and went, The Lord answered my prayer in 1 week. He sent me this woman who took me around and introduced me to people and gave me these story ideas and she could edit my stories because even though she had no journalism training, she could read. She loved reading women's magazines, and with that love of the magazine, she had a good style in her mind, and she helped me become a better writer. It was fantastic. The boy, he just wanted to go to games, football and basketball games. We'd go, and that was fine. Desiree was trickier because she didn't like men because her own dad was such a jerk. So it was a little harder to win her over, but one day I took her to the mall, and I bought her a pair of shoes. And she said, "Why?" And I said, "I just want to do something nice for you." And she thought about it, and in the car coming home, she turned to me and she said, "Little man, there's hope for you." And I took that as the sign that I needed. The people in the world who were reading my articles or not reading them didn't know any of this was going on, but there was slight improvement in the paper, although I wasn't popular by any means, but I wasn't exactly hated. I was slowly getting better, but not good enough. After 6 months of dating this woman, her 2 kids, and this doggone little dog, I decided that I needed to make it permanent. And I came up with another one of what my grandfather used to call cockamamie schemes. I decided to propose marriage in the newspaper. And I went to the boss, and she said no. I said, "Why?" And she said, "Because that's not what we do here in the newspaper. We don't give personal details of our life like that." And I said, "Look, these people hate me here. I have nothing to lose." She says, "Oh, yeah? What happens if Karen says no?" I said, "We will run a correction box." She kicked me out. She said, "You know what? Do what you want, go." So with that resounding send-off, I sat down to write the most important story of my life. And for the first 3 days, I kind of froze. You know, I really think that the problem with the way we communicate today is we communicate too much with PowerPoint and bullet points, you know, and facts, figures, and numbers when people really want to hear this. Because I can tell your neural brain endings are very flaring now because I see a lot of smiles. But now that I've stopped telling the story, the smiles start to go away. And that's what I remembered when I was writing that thing. I need to write a story that follows this. I need to tell it. I knew the last line, which was what? Yeah, I knew that, but I didn't know how to get there. And then I remembered another lesson that I had learned in Charleston some 20 plus years before, whatever it was. Back then it was probably 10 years before. I had written a story here for the Gazette about a friend of mine named David Hoffman who had a dog named Champ. And we called him Champ the Wonder Dog. And what made Champ the Wonder Dog so worthy of being a wonder dog and being featured in the Gazette was that Champ could go get beer on command. You said to Champ, "Champ, get me a beer," and Champ would scamper over to the refrigerator, pull the handle with his teeth, grab the can of beer, and he would drop it off on the owner's lap. And all y'all love that story. It was 1983, and it set the state on fire. People loved that story. It had pictures, and Stroh's came along, and they turned it into a TV commercial you might remember about a dog getting beer. That was a West Virginia dog. And it won the Clio for the best ad of the year. And so I thought about that, and I said, that's right, that dog in West Virginia. I'll write about this dog. And I wrote the most important paragraph of my entire life. Here in Texas, I've met the woman of my dreams. Unfortunately, she lives with the dog of my nightmares. And then I talked about how we both met, and we spilled, and we high-fived, how the boy wanted to go to games, and the girl was suspicious of little man, and the dog didn't like me. And then I proposed. On the morning of October 2nd, 1994, while all y'all were asleep in bed, I'm looking up at the ceiling. And I'm just waiting. I've got to hear that newspaper hit that driveway. 4 o'clock, 5 a.m., 6 a.m. At 6:15 a.m., I hear the paper hit the driveway, and I run outside of my bathrobe, and I pull the plastic off the paper, and there's the headline, "Dog's Not All I Need to Fill Hole in My Life." I've got a bouquet of flowers hidden in a back bag. I throw them in the car. I get in the car, and I drive the couple of miles to Karen's house. It's still dark, and I'm knocking on the door, and I can't wake her up. But she finally comes to the door, and she says, "What? It's 6:30 a.m. What in God's name do you want?" And I said, "Hey, honey, good morning. I'm here to read you my Sunday newspaper column." "Oh, no, I'll read it later. I'm going back to bed." No, I have to read it to you now before anybody sees it." And I walked in, and I remember she scrunched herself up in her pillows. And I stood over her, and I just started reading her this story right out of the paper. I'll just read you the final paragraphs so you can see how I popped the question. Finally, one day I decided to see the world through Sadie's eyes. I was a big, smelly brute who came between her and her mother, a brute who didn't like her. So that day I sat down beside Sadie and told her I was sorry. Sorry for the way some mean man had apparently treated her, and sorry for how I hadn't shown her the proper understanding. "I'll try to love you, Sadie," I said. "We're both lucky that Karen found us. I love you. I love you." I said it over and over, and those big expressive eyes looked up at me, and she licked my face. Since that day, I always tell Sadie when I'm about to go so as not to startle her, and Karen says, "I'm glad you and Sadie have made peace." But now I see the hole in my life needs more than just a dog to fill it. Karen, there's something magical about you, me, the girl, the boy, and even your doggone little dog. I love you, Karen. I'll always tell you when I'm about to go so as not to startle you, and I promise to come back. I'll always come back. I want to stay forever. Karen, will you marry me? And I looked up, and her face was frozen, but there were tears coming down her cheeks. And then finally, I saw her mouth go like this, which I knew wasn't a... And I grabbed the flowers out of the bag, and I walked over to hand it to her, and I gave her a hug, and then I heard, seconds later, a knock on the door, and I opened it up, and there's the big girl and the little boy standing there, and they're very upset. "What are you doing here this early, David?" "Hey, guys, I'm so excited you guys are awake. I just proposed marriage to your mom in the newspaper, and she said, yes, we're getting married." "Oh, come on, David, don't lie." "Oh, no, look, here it is." will you marry me? And before they could even process it, I remember getting down in front of John. I said, Jonathan, can I be your dad? And he said, you are going to be my dad. And he hugged me. And I said, Desiree, can I be your dad? And she grabbed me. And she says, I guess so, little man. And then they both said, go propose to the dog, which I hadn't thought of doing, but the dog is over on her bed, and she's just, when I walk over to her, she starts shaking like she always did. And I say, come on, girl, you know what's going to happen here. I just, calm down. Would you make it unanimous? Would you marry me? And with that face, she just looked at me, and she went, huh. And that's how I got engaged on a vote of 3-1. So let me end the story by telling you what happened next, because it was really kind of magical. Everybody read the story. The sun came up and everybody read the story, and the reason why they read it was because it started with a dog, and it followed this pattern, and it ended with a big surprise. So they said, hey, honey, you need to read this article in the paper. Hey, neighbor, hey, grandma, read this. And everybody read it, and they wanted to know the denouement at the end. So they called the newspaper. And they said, what'd that girl say, that Yankee boy? The paper called me and they said, we have to tell our readers what the answer was. And I said, well, she said yes, but I'm going to tell them next week. She said that. They said, that's too long. We need to tell them now. I said, how? There was no internet yet. She said, we'll come up with something. It was 1994. The internet came in 95. In 1994, they had a billboard on the airport freeway, and it said, read the Star Telegram. Time, 4:51. Temperature, 81 degrees. Karen says yes. And that's the moment that Texas began to feel warm and friendly like West Virginia did. It took divine intervention. People stopped me on the street and they didn't say, boy, where are you from and what church do you go to? They said, you're the guy that wrote the story about the dog. Man, that's my favorite story ever. I got that hanging on the refrigerator. I got a dog like that. I sent that to my granny in Wichita Falls. What did the dog say? I said, well, the dog said no, but everybody else said yes. Because now I was like them. Now when they asked me where I was from and who I was married to and if I had any kids, I had all the right answers. And everything just got wonderful. It was one story that changed my life. And now it's been 20 years. We just celebrated our 20th wedding anniversary last week. And we went back to that hotel and we tried to figure out where we had our first kiss in the parking lot. And because we've been married 20 years, we argued about it. And I raised those two kids, and they're grown, and they're doing fine. And we have our own son now. He's 17. We were both 40 when we had him. And his name's Austin. If he had been born here, I probably would have named him Beckley. But the reason why I named him Austin was because Waco and Waxahachie Lieber just don't sound good, you know. Before we break up, I would like to just share with you one more important thing. I'm glad we got to share that story about how I got to survive and how I ended up fitting in a place that was much more difficult than this was for me. And it allows me to thank you for the hospitality that you guys showed me and the way you set me up. And one of the ways I'd like to repay you is by sharing with you, before I go, the single most important way to survive in life in the 21st century. I want to put my other hat on now. Tomorrow, March 18th, 2015, is the 10th anniversary of when I launched the Watchdog column. I launched it at the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, and then 2 years ago I went to the Dallas Morning News. There are only probably 5 or 6 Watchdog columnists in America, even though there's hundreds of newspapers. What the Watchdog column is, it's a place for people to send their unsolvable problems to me that they can't fix. And they think that I'm going to fix them for them, but I'm not. I used to try and do that, and it was too hard because I've already had 50,000 letters sent to me in the past 10 years of every problem of humanity. I figured rather than try and fix the problem of everybody, I'd show them how to fix it themselves. It's kind of a novel concept, and the reason that I came up with this was because I was having so many problems. This was back in the time when corporations started to cheat their customers with customer service and 1-800 numbers that led you to India and computers that never lasted and banks that were messing with people and all that. And I was having problems because I was buying products that were inferior, and I was hiring people to do work on my house who had to come back 2-3 times if they weren't crooks at all. And the thing came to a head when I hired a roofer, because we have a lot of hail in Texas, and I hired a roofer, and that guy went and roofed the house behind me instead of mine. And then I hired a second roofer, and he went to prison for fraud and filed bankruptcy for $600,000. So even though I was the watchdog, I was hiring morons, and I wasn't smart about what I was doing. And I figured out this wasn't going to work. If I was going to survive and help people, I needed to figure out a way to come up with it. So I did. I came up with a concept that I call Watchdog Nation, which teaches Americans that it's really easy to protect yourself if you spend about 4 minutes doing it before you do anything. Because I just figured that you just have to ask a bunch of questions. And I figured that people were writing me with these letters about how they were ripped off in these scams for $10,000, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000. And then they said, Mr. Lieber, after I gave the money to the guy and he moved to Costa Rica with my money, I Googled him. He did this to 100 other people. Why don't you expose him? And I began to think, well, why don't I get people to Google before they buy something or hire somebody rather than after? Get them into the habit, because we don't do that because we're older and the Google box is kind of new and it's not built in. And then I began to see that the Texans didn't like to do something that I have on this button. This button says ask a bunch of questions. And I realized the Texans did not like to do this because just like they don't like to beep their horns, they don't like to do this because they think it's rude. I learned this at a women's club. There was a woman in the back. She was raising her hand. She said, Madam Chairman, a motion to the amendment to the bylaws. I second the caveat. And someone says, will you hush up? You are asking too many questions, or you are going to get caught in rush hour traffic. And I began to realize that if I could just get people to ask maybe a couple more questions before they bought anything, that they would never need to write to me and I could cut down on my mail. And it was so simple, but it worked. I thought of Detective Columbo, who's at the door. And he says, just one more question, right? So watch what happens. This is the representative of the magic Google box. This was one of the habits that I picked up in West Virginia. I began to collect old antique boxes. And in this box, I have the symbol of American wealth. Starbucks. The reason I call it the symbol of American wealth is because anybody that can get you to spend $5 on a cup of dirty water with whipped cream is doing pretty good. And I noticed as I traveled around Charleston, and by the way, the city looks magnificent. It looks clean. It looks uncluttered. It's just in great shape. It's just fantastic. I noticed that you don't have a standalone Starbucks store, right? So what I'm going to show you now isn't going to work in Charleston, but it's representative of what's happening in the world. Because how many sizes, I'm sure you've all been, how many sizes do they have in a Starbucks store on a menu? 3, yeah. They actually have 4. Someone said 4, and they were right. They have this 4th side, which is called a Trenta, but if you drink it, you're going to die. So the 3 sizes in Starbucks are large, medium, and small, right? No, because that would be too simple to give us what we like and understand. So we're going to be a corporation, and we're going to confuse people. We're going to use words like deluxe and elite and premium, even when it isn't. We're going to call the large a what? Did you hear how many people said grande? That proves my point, because it's not grande. The medium is a grande. The company purposely deceives you by using foreign language. The large is called a what? Venti, which is what word? What language? Italian. Why would you call something Italian? And then the medium is called a grande, which is Spanish for what? So large, but they've changed the meaning of the word and they make the large the medium, and that's not fair to us. And then you say to the barista, you know, barista, I don't want a fancy foreign title. I want a small cup of coffee. And the barista says, you can't have that. You have to have a tall. And I say, barista, listen carefully. I do not want a tall. I want a small. And what does she say? Tall is small. And if there is one phrase that represents what's happening in the world today, that is it. Tall is small. These are the 3 sizes that Americans order every single day because it's what's on the menu. But in Watchdog Nation, we say, don't buy it until you check it. So watch what happens when I ask 2 questions on the magic Google box. And this is like the one thing I want you to remember from me, because I think this will save you a lot of anguish. Google box. 2 questions. What is the secret size cup at Starbucks? And it turns out there's a word. And if you know the word, you get the secret size. Now, here in the Student Union, they have a Starbucks store, but it's not a standalone Starbucks store. This only works in standalone Starbucks stores. But does anybody know what the secret word for the secret size would be? Nope, not yet. Not that one yet. It's the opposite of tall, which is what? Short. So you say to the barista, "Barista, can I please have a short coffee of the day?" And she reaches under the counter and she pulls out this. And nobody knows that this exists. 1 out of 100 people know this exists, and it's usually because they worked in Starbucks. But it's cheaper. Short. It's not on the menu. And that kind of bothers me. Because I don't like it when they keep secrets from the people who are giving them money. The second question I'm going to ask is, and the final question, because I only need a couple extra, is how do I drink free coffee at Starbucks? Does anybody know the word? I heard it before. Sample. You say to the barista, "Can I please have a sample of the coffee of the day?" And she reaches under the counter and she gives you this. And you say to her, "Thank you so much," and then you do this. And then you do this. And then you do this. "Can I have another sample of something else, please?" And you have 2 sample cups and you're flying off the ceiling like a chimichanga. But nobody knows this exists. You can get anything for free in this sample cup except a Frappuccino. Why can't you get a free Frappuccino in this cup? You said it won't fit. You're being logical. But this is about corporate deception. It's because those rats have another secret size. See? So here's what America buys every day, but here's what's just a few feet away under the counter. So how do we go from here to here? There. And the problem is, we don't think like that because we didn't grow up with it, and so we still buy things with trust. So I'm saying, before you hire a roofer, you Google his name. Roofer John Smith, Sissonville, and ripoff. Roofer John Smith and Sissonville and scam. Find out if people are calling him a ripper or a scammer before you hire him, because if you hire him and then you Google him, you'll find out later, you'll go, "I should have listened to that guy from Texas." So that's how Watchdog Nation works. And it really does work. I'm really proud of it. I wrote a book called Dave Lieber's Watchdog Nation, Bite Back When Businesses and Scammers Do You Wrong. And this book shows, it works all over the country. It just shows you how to use the Google box and how to talk to people on the phone and customer service so they treat you like the 1 out of 100 that they can't mess with. And it comes with this membership card that says you're a citizen of Watchdog Nation, which I want people to just keep forever in their purse or their wallet. And then when that time comes and that guy's trying to rip them off, you go, "Whoa," that's a word I learned in Texas, "Whoa, I'm a citizen of Watchdog Nation." I know the columnist for the Dallas Morning News, and he's on the internet, and he told me that if I ever meet anybody like you, to let him know, because he might want to write about what you're doing here, and his contact information is on the back. "Do you want to mess with me?" So that's what I suggest. If anybody wants one of these books, I brought a bunch with me. They're $20, and like I say, they work everywhere. And I do have a credit card machine. Yes. Yeah, very good. Now, who said that? Okay, I have to reward that, don't I? Because you can't tell people to do something, then when someone does it. So I have the what I call the cataract editions of these 2 books. So you can pick one of these 2 and have it as a gift. So you pass that back to that gentleman there who's asked for the sample. You pick one of those, okay? So the other book that I brought with me is called The Dog of My Nightmares, Stories by Texas columnist Dave Lieber. And it's got about 90 stories in here. The first story in it is the marriage proposal story that we talked about. And then the rest of the book goes into, adventures in Texas. My favorite one, I guess, that I love to talk about is I went to a city council meeting, and this lady got a certificate for 50 years of perfect driving. She was 74 years old. Her name was Miss Audrey. They called her up and they said, she's never gotten a ticket, she's never had an accident, let's honor her. And looking for an adventure 3 times a week to write about in the paper, I went up to Miss Audrey and I said, can I ride with you tomorrow? And can you show me what a perfect driver is? And she said, I'd be happy to. So the next day we got in her V8 cylinder car and we drove around. And every light, she got impatient. At the Roy Rogers light, she couldn't stand waiting anymore, so she got out of line. She cut through the parking lot and came out in front. Then she went speeding down the street, and then she didn't put her turn signal on. And I said, Miss Audrey, you're a terrible driver. She said, you're only terrible if you get caught. And obviously, I've never been caught, so hush up. So this book is 10. This book is 20. I'll be happy to sign it for you. I'll be out there. Let me just end by checking this. Oh, those books are a lot more on the internet and in stores, so I'm giving the Golden Eagles discount tonight. Okay, thank you. I want to thank Dr. Welsh for taking this big risk and bringing in this non-academic speaker to talk here. I think that's wonderful. And I want to thank Jim Bissett, who's the director, the marketing vice president here, and Carrie Stolings. And I really want to thank this man here, Gary Borstein, because if Gary hadn't talked to Dr. Welsh, I wouldn't be here tonight. So thank you, Gary. If you liked tonight, thank Gary, and if you didn't, blame me, you know. I want to end with this thought. You taught me when I moved here how to say hello. You taught me when I lived here how to be a straight-up good person. And I hope tonight I proved that you taught me how to say thank you. So thank you, Charleston, West Virginia.